You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristen Dilley.
My name is Kristen Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristen Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
It has suddenly become winter in both of our locations, has it not? You were wearing a hat earlier when I got on this Zoom call.
This is crazy. It's like somebody threw a switch. It's now acting like November.
Yeah, same here. It was in the 40s this morning. No, it was in the 30s this morning. But I went to school for the first time in my heavy coat and my scarf and my gloves, and it still feels like it's in the 40s outside. Winter has arrived, sadly.
Same thing here. It was 29 degrees when we got up this morning, and in the 70s, I don't know, 2 weeks ago maybe?
On Saturday in Northern Virginia, when I went to watch our cross-country team compete at the state cross-country meet, it was 70 degrees outside. It was a stunningly beautiful day, and here it is 2 days later, and it's freezing, and I've got the scarves and the gloves, and I hate it. I hate winter.
It's not my favorite either.
Yes, but you live in the icebox of Connecticut, my friend. You have to get used to it at some point.
Pamela and I are working on a project. It's mostly Pamela. I'm just in the assist role, where we're adding additional felt-lined curtains. Flannel, I think is the correct term. And we're up in the laundry room, and she's having me hold one of the new flannel-lined curtains as she puts new curtain rings on it. We're going to go hang it in one of the bedrooms. And she said to me, if we ever move, meaning again, we're moving somewhere warm.
Yep.
As we shiver and prepare for the onslaught of winter.
Ugh.
The two worst words in anyone's language up here in New England, fuel bills. They're coming.
Ooh.
Supposed to be ouchy this year.
Yeah, I bet so. My goodness gracious. From our very, very cold hands and hearts to all of you, we hope that winter has not hit you where you are yet, and that you're enjoying a more warm and seasonable, maybe unseasonable day than we currently are. We are both freezing, and neither of us like it.
I did take my hat off, though, to record the podcast.
You didn't have to. It looked cute.
Oh, thanks. I might wear it next time at the rate we're going.
So, Bill, I know that you mentioned last time your town had a little bit of a snafu, would be the small and understated way to put it. Environmental disaster would be the larger and more accurate way to put it. Without going into too terribly much detail, how's the cleanup going? You guys all right?
We're better. I did read something very sobering this morning, which is that of the 8,200 gallons of gasoline that spilled on the hill leading through the center of town, they haven't actually recovered anything close to 8,200 gallons. So it's underground, and that's not necessarily a good thing. The people have been great. The crews have been fantastic. They're working very hard to clean the mess up. And now they've gotten the surface areas all cleaned up, and they dug up lawns and removed soil and all that kind of stuff. And now it's a matter of extracting it from our groundwater, which is messy.
As we said last time, thank you to all of the responders who are there helping to try to make life for all of y'all a little bit easier. And so we continue to extend those thanks to everybody who is doing their best to get you guys back to normal, although it sounds like it may be a little bit.
I know a lot of us tend to be critical sometimes of government and government workers. I just have to say, in a situation like this, man, these people have been amazing. Volunteers and the staff here in our town, state people, federal people, National Guard, they've all been amazing. And I know we all tend to criticize sometimes, but I have to say these first, second, and third responders have just been amazing, and we're thrilled to have them here helping us clean up the mess.
On today's episode, we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the Engage with Empathy movement. I'm not sure what we want to call it. Is it a movement? What is it specifically, would you say, if you had to put a label on it?
I would say it's a movement. We're certainly seeing in the last year or so a significant effort. I think I first talked to Sarah Turney about this maybe as far back as 2 years ago, and she talked quite a bit about ethics in true crime. I think the Engage with Empathy campaign and even the hashtag Engage with Empathy is a very nicely phrased way of conveying what it is that those of us who work in the true crime media space and are people who've been touched by violent crime are looking for, what we're going for. I'm not saying we always get there, and I'm not 100% certain that ethics in true crime is exactly the right phrase, whereas Engage with Empathy, I think, really works.
And when we're talking about that, what we're really talking about is this idea of, at least for me, and of course you're going to have your own feelings on it, so I'm going to get you to weigh in too. Engage with empathy for me means being cognizant of the fact that behind every crime that is the basis for a splashy HBO or Netflix series, there are real people, real families, real victims, real law enforcement, first responders, profilers, law enforcement agencies, you name it, who lived it, who deal with the trauma of it, and who need our support and our empathy, rather than having their stories exploited for TV, big splashy series. Of course, I'm thinking of the current Netflix drama Dahmer, which has invited so much controversy here recently. I think it's important to remember, and I know you as the brother of a crime victim believe this too, it is really important if you are going to get involved with a case, if you're going to be interested in a case, that you remember that underneath all of this, there are real people. I had a student, this is what really put this in my mind, who asked me a couple of weeks back right after Dahmer first dropped on Netflix, "Oh, Miss Dilly, are you watching Dahmer?" And when I told her no, she looked a little taken aback and she was like, "But you're all into crime. Why would you not watch Dahmer?" And I said, "Are you aware of the fact that the victims' families and the surviving victims, because there is one at the very least that I'm aware of," I said, "Were you aware that they feel re-traumatized by watching this on the air, that this is something that is hard for them to watch because it is their lives right there on the screen. They're watching someone who got paid to play them, play out the most jarring, wrenching, emotional moments of their life on TV for your entertainment." And her face dropped a little bit. She looked a little dismayed by the whole thing. And she said, "Oh gosh, I'd never thought about it that way." And I said, "It's okay. Most people don't think of it that way, but think about it for a second." And she said, "What about all the Bundy movies and things? You've watched those too." And I said, "Did you know Bundy had a surviving victim? How do you think she feels when, as a culture, we seem to fetishize Ted Bundy?" He is really the biggest example of people who, for whatever reason, they really Ted Bundy. And this goes back to when you and I went to our first crime con together. I remember seeing a woman walking around, not just in a dress made out of material that had Ted Bundy and other serial killers' mugshots on it, but I remember a woman who had a full forearm Ted Bundy tattoo. And I couldn't believe that there is a woman walking around with the face of a serial killer tattooed on her arm. Why would you ever want that man tattooed on your body after what he did to so many women? Why are we sexualizing someone who murdered women graphically, horrifically? Why are we doing that? That's where Engage with Empathy comes from. For me, we should not be glorifying, fetishizing, however you want to put it, serial killers, and we shouldn't be putting them up for entertainment in a way that re-traumatizes the victims and their families. What are your thoughts on that, Bill?
I think you make a lot of really good points. I know we've talked about this glorification of serial killers in a way that I just find incredibly disturbing. We've met hundreds, if not thousands, of people as a result of our work in advocacy in true crime. And I think I would always try to find a way to be polite.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember when we saw people at CrimeCon, it seemed to be kind of New Orleans was the one I think that really popped for me. And that's actually the CrimeCon where the reporter from the Washington Post was following me around.
Yeah, I remember that.
Recording my impressions and my experience at CrimeCon. And they talked about this conflict that we all feel about using media to help shine the spotlight on unsolved cases. It does have a lot of benefit, but there's a downside to it. And some of it is things like trying to smile as a person wearing a dress made of the faces of serial killers walks by, as if somehow that's hip and cool and edgy, when I think it's disgusting.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever mentioned this before. I was approached a few years ago by a museum.
Oh, yes, I remember
and they
this.
wanted something of my sister Kathy's to put in their museum of serial killers. And
Alcatraz East, I think.
Yeah. I was polite, but I was sitting there thinking, I told them, no, absolutely not. I remember thinking, why in the world would I give you something that belonged to my sister Kathy, who died in the Colonial Parkway Murders, so you can show it off at your cheeseball museum of serial killers? Are you serious? On what planet do you think talking to me about that is a good idea? I just walked away thinking, ugh, I don't even have that much that belonged to my sister Kathy.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I think in retrospect, my parents, who are both gone now, made some mistakes 36 years ago. One of them was getting rid of all of Kathy's stuff, which I think I understand it. But I think now I kind of wish I had a few more things. They don't have to be valuable things, just things that belong to Kathy.
Sure.
They were in a very big hurry to get rid of all of those things. Now I'm sorry, because I'd like to have a few more things here in the library where I record Mind Over Murder with you each week that would just be physical objects that had belonged to her.
Yeah.
At the same time, they got rid of letters, hundreds and hundreds of letters that we'd received, sympathy cards and letters, but many of them contained really wonderful stories written about Kathy. And my parents got rid of all of those. And I'm really sorry now that I don't have all those things. Sometimes people approach true crime in a very unthinking way.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the Engage with Empathy campaign has some terrific ideas. At the recent CrimeCon a couple of months ago, Sarah Turney, sister of Elisa Turney, Julie Murray, sister of Maura, and Kelsey German Seibert. I'm not sure Kelsey was married at that point. I think that was a little bit before she got married.
I think it was too.
She's now Kelsey German Seibert, who is Liberty German's sister. The three of them did an outstanding panel at CrimeCon where they talked about ethics in true crime. In my mind, that was the kickoff of this campaign, Engage with Empathy.
It's interesting because there are so many tensions and complexities that come within the true crime space. On the one hand, you want to do the reporting and the advocacy part of things that we do. I hope that our listeners would agree that we try to do this with as much tact and compassion and sensitivity toward the victims as we can. If we ever reached a place where I thought we were glorifying killers or anything else, I would say, hey, it's time to set this aside. This isn't working for me. And I think you would do the same thing.
Yes.
At the same time, there is also that element of the true crime space that is looking for ratings. They're looking for money to monetize, whether it's monetized podcast or series like the Lover's Lane Murders, which was made about the Colonial Parkway Murders. You also have people who are looking to make a buck off of whatever it is that they are working with in the true crime space. Sometimes that leads to making choices that are not empathetic. I know that you don't want to call out the creators of Lover's Lane Murders because you had a good working relationship with them, but I will. I think that the use of the crime scene photos from various of the Colonial Parkway Murders crime scenes was a very poor choice that they included in the Lover's Lane Murders. I get why they did it, and you get why they did it too. It is all about what is going to make the series sell, and it would not have sold nearly as well if there weren't, gory graphic crime scene photos. But it was a horrible choice from the standpoint of people who knew the victims and loved the victims, like your family and all of the other families of the 8 victims in the Colonial Parkway Murders. And I think that when money is on the line and ratings and various other things, that's where the trouble tends to begin. You've got people in the crime space who want to honor the victims, but you also have others who are willing to exploit what has happened for money, ratings, or what have you. And that's where things start to get a little uncomfortable for me as a true crime consumer and also as a true crime creator. Do you feel the same way at times?
I do, and I think your criticisms of the Lover's Lane Murders, which of course covered the Colonial Parkway Murders, I think is 100% valid, and I feel the same way. As a consulting producer on that show, I expressed my opinion in the strongest possible terms about the fact that I thought they were using the crime scene photos, which the most shocking ones are actually of my sister Kathy and her girlfriend Rebecca Dowski. Yeah. And I thought it was disgusting, and I said so. I wasn't driving the bus. If NBC Universal and our friends at Oxygen and Texas Crew Productions and XG Productions were in the driver's seat. And at the end of the day, it's the person writing the checks, which is NBC Universal in the series that we just described. They're the ones that actually ultimately decide. And it didn't seem concern about the victims' families was paramount in their decision-making process. We see this a lot with podcasters, too. We're following the Delphi case involving Liberty German and Abigail Williams, and there's been a significant development, as we talked about a few weeks ago on the podcast. A suspect, Richard Allen, was arrested on October 26th. The charging documents, which are quite detailed and are usually public, in this example, in the Delphi twin murders of Libby and Abby, have been sealed. I mentioned to you just before we started today that I'm still trying to follow along in terms of developments with the case. What I'm finding that's happening is that there's a lot of just rank speculation going on. I look for new information on the case from time to time. What I'm seeing are just one podcaster after another, and they're just completely speculating. They're just making stuff up. It's as if you and I went out for coffee and just sat there and just kicked around ideas. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's one thing for you and I to do that over a beer or an iced tea or whatever your beverage of choice is. It's another thing to put that up on the World Wide Web. And you're just like, I'm trying to think of a non-profane way to put this. They're just pulling this stuff out of who knows where and just throwing it up there. And they're saying, oh, Keegan Kline has to be involved and his father. And they may be valid theories, but why don't we let this process work and take this case to trial? I'm actually very concerned there could be a possibility there may be a mistrial in some of these examples because people are just throwing out baseless speculation, naming suspects, doxing, as they say, suspects, potential suspects. The practice of doxing is providing people's information, names, addresses, dates of birth. And these are people who have not necessarily been charged with a crime. And I think some of this stuff is just outrageously irresponsible. I think that's very frightening. If we're really supposed to be on the side of the Williams and German family in the Delphi case, where we are looking for justice, we want some degree of, I don't like that word closure, but justice I'm reasonably comfortable with, then why would we be just going on the World Wide Web and just throwing out completely crackpot theories and naming names, saying, I think this person's involved, I think that person. I think it's outrageous and stupid and short-sighted, and it is not helping this case move forward.
Agreed. And one of the discussions that you and I had when we first started covering the Colonial Parkway murders for our podcast is, how do we handle the name of suspects? Because we have people who have been named in the media. We have people who have not been named in the media. We have people who are everybody knows they've been a person of interest, but it's never actually been reported. We really had to figure out, how are we going to deal with this? And eventually we came up with something that we're fairly comfortable with, which is, if the media has widely reported the name of a person as a suspect, like, for example, Fred Atwell, we were okay with mentioning that. But there are others that we, after much discussion with each other, determined, all right, this one we're not naming. Because it may be like common knowledge on, say, a website, or maybe just local hearsay, rumor, gossip. But if they haven't been named, we're not going to do it either. It's a sticky wicket. It really, truly is, if you'll pardon the vaguely British sounding expression there. It is hard to figure out what are the ethics involved when you are trying to do reporting. But what you're describing, of people just randomly throwing out theories with no more basis in reality than we're sitting around and BSing and tossing things out just to see what sticks to the wall, it's not responsible. As you mentioned, I think there's a possibility of very real danger when it comes time to go to trial, to the process of getting justice for these young women. As I know I mentioned once before, I know the FBI is not entirely thrilled that you and I sit here and discuss this case. And they've mentioned before the idea that, if this ever goes to trial, we're going to have some problems. Well, buddy, arrest a suspect first, and then we'll worry about trial.
Yeah. And I've pushed back hard against this and said, look, it's pretty clear that the FBI would like to muzzle me in the Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm not having it. They haven't even identified a suspect, at least publicly. There are lots of people whose names have been associated with the Colonial Parkway murders, whose names I know. I have said sometimes with a bit of snark in my voice that I feel
never.
I feel like I can name most of the suspects.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I know them all, but I certainly know a fair number of them. We have sometimes identified people by name, particularly if they're dead. And it never occurred to me until I was listening to you a moment ago. There is one small advantage to a case that's dragged on for 36 years, which is that some of the suspects are dead. I never thought of it as an advantage, because most of the time it's a frustration. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. One of the disturbing developments in the Delphi case is this decision by the judge to recuse himself after some of these internet fools started researching him and his family and his children and outing them on the internet. And I was shocked. And at first I thought the judge was being a bit of a wuss, but now I think I want to take that back. Yeah. I certainly never said that on the air.
Of course.
I thought the judge might have been overreacting, but then I thought to myself, wait a minute, this guy's got school-age kids. Yeah. And people are outing his children. What in the world does that have to do with this case? I would ask any of these fools, how do you think that's helping the community of Delphi or the German or Williams family get anywhere close to justice? This judge has now stepped back from this case, and the case has to be reassigned. They're actually delaying justice. And why they're doing these incredibly stupid and damaging things is beyond me. That is as far away from engaged with empathy as I could possibly believe. I'm so shocked that people are being this stupid and so willing to damage the successful prosecution of this case. If this man, the current suspect, can't get a fair trial, this could end up in some sort of mistrial. This is insane, and I am supportive of the families in all of these examples. Sarah Turney's sister's case, her father, Michael Turney, has been charged in her stepsister Alyssa's 2001 murder, and that case is going to trial, I think, later on this year. It was delayed due to COVID and other issues. She's talked about it on her Voices for Justice podcast. I believe that trial is now coming up later on this year, if I'm not mistaken. The idea that people are going to be just inquisitive to the point where they're starting to ask questions that we don't really even deserve answers to. I don't need to know anything about the personal life of the judge and his wife and kids in the Delphi case. Are you kidding? How is that important or valuable or even public knowledge? And they've scared the bejesus out of this poor judge, and there's one clerk in this relatively small town of Delphi, and they were supposed to be handling this case. At first, the judge expressed concern about the safety of himself and his very small staff. Ultimately, he took himself out of the case and recused himself. That is actually damaging this case.
And you do have to wonder, what is at the bottom of that? Is it the sense of, I want to be involved in this case, I want to be breaking news, I want to be giving something that hasn't been revealed before? If the sense of, oh, I want to share information like a journalist would is what's driving some of this, journalists have a working set of ethics and morals that they have to use as part of their reporting. And part of that is you don't go about revealing names and personal information of people who are related to the case or even tangentially related to the case. You're not, as you mentioned before, you're not getting anywhere by scaring off any person who is even remotely related to this case. You're not helping. What information exactly do you think you're providing by sharing school and the address of children belonging to the judge? Why would you do that? You're going to scare the heck out of a child just because their dad happens to be working on this high-profile case? Why would you do that?
They've lost a qualified judge who felt like he had to step back and recuse himself. And at the same time, another podcaster a few months back took it upon themselves to leak documents related to the Keegan-Klein charges. And I'm not saying that Keegan-Klein is necessarily an upstanding citizen, but even though I might personally think he's a sleazebag and may be involved in child porn and pursuing sex with underage girls and a lot of illegal and highly distasteful stuff, he's still entitled to be treated as innocent until proven guilty. To put those documents out, which were briefly available on an unsecured part of a law enforcement website, which was a mistake and was corrected. The podcasters didn't care. They put it all out there and it ended up being all over the media, which is why I know about it. And the truth is, I actually don't need to know that stuff, but it's too late now. You can't put that genie back in the bottle or whatever crazy lame expression I want to come up with here. But these things are not helping, actually. This bizarre compulsion to research things that we actually don't need to know. I will admit, I am intensely curious about this case. I want to see justice for Libby and Abby. But remember, they're gone now. Those two little girls, and that's really what they were, are dead. We now need to be thinking about the families.
Yes.
And we've met their families, who are wonderful people. They deserve better than this.
Yes.
And as curious as I might be, and as interested as I think both of us are in seeing this case move forward, I'm seeing things and hearing things in the last few months in this case that I think are incredibly disturbing. I know anyone can start a podcast, but I think you've got to keep your heart engaged while you're looking for information. Like you said at the top of this podcast, we all have to remember these are real people. This isn't some fictional story. This isn't Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is somebody's, in this case, the three people we just talked about, this is their sister. These three amazing women, Sarah Turney, Julie Murray, and Kelsey German-Seibert, and I've met two of the three of them. I'm so sorry I missed meeting Julie at CrimeCon because I think she's been incredibly impressive. But these amazing women, they all lost their sisters. Their advocacy was forced on them, which in a way was forced on you and me because of our family and personal connections to crime victims.
Yeah.
And we've actually found, as we've met a lot of people in the true crime space, not everybody, but a lot of people who do this kind of work got into it because they were touched by this type of true crime.
Yeah.
If you can keep your sense of empathy and heart, I think that's incredibly important and is sometimes missing.
I agree 100%. And Laura Richards had posted something a couple of weeks back that really kicked off for me this sense of, okay, popular culture has taken this interest in true crime and they dragged it in the wrong direction in some senses. She had posted a picture of a sweatshirt that was available on Etsy that she found to be particularly insensitive and, quite frankly, disgusting. And I agree with her 110%. It is your basic cute little hoodie that you can wear for the fall, like a nice color. It was like a rust-colored shade. And in white cursive script, it said, "Choke me like Bundy, eat me like Dahmer." And that, quite frankly, is disgusting.
And if somebody thinks that somehow that t-shirt, hoodie, whatever, is edgy and that makes them a true crime fan, I would say, you know something? I think it makes you a borderline ghoul.
Yes.
It's just disgusting. The glorification of serial killers is not hip and cool. It's disgusting. That I hope that no one else goes through the kind of experience that people that we know and my family have been through. I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
No.
It's very hard not to climb off that soapbox when you see things like that. And this is where Laura Richards is absolutely right. And your reaction is very natural. You just end up shaking your head like, what are you thinking?
And even things like friend of a friend sent me a picture on Facebook of a sweatshirt that said "murder shows in comfy clothes." And there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that there's blood spatter all over it.
That part I don't get.
Yeah, I could wear murder shows in comfy clothes, but I will not wear it because it's got blood spatter on it. You and I have seen crime scene photos.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in walking around being evocative of a crime scene photo.
At the same time, the murder shows and comfy clothes, I get it. Or our friend Cheryl McCollum, they talk about a wine and crime where they have their get-togethers, where there's actually a lot of amazing people, a lot of true crime experts, forensics experts, investigators, all sorts of amazing people. So there's a lot to be learned and inspired by when you attend something like that. I don't have a problem with that. And look, do I watch crime shows? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, both of us do.
And my partner Pamela, who's not anywhere near as into this as you and I are, but even she'll say, oh, let's watch one. She likes the ones where there's a advancement of the case or maybe a conviction or a suspect is named, that sort of thing. And don't we all?
Yeah. You and I will both watch Unsolved Mysteries. I know like the most recent season of Unsolved Mysteries is out.
Yeah.
Haven't sat down to watch it yet, but I will.
Those are 100%. Really good. And I'm not troubled by the ones that are left as a question mark at the end of the show, but they ask some interesting questions. I like the ones, too, that maybe do identify a suspect and indicate that someone is going to trial or whatever. Again, innocent until proven guilty. I think, as Sarah, Julie, and Kelsey were emphasizing at CrimeCon, there has to be a way to cover these cases and tell these stories. And remember, you're telling the victim's story.
Yes, exactly.
There has to be a way to do that in a way that is sympathetic to the victims and their survivors. And this is where Ryan Murphy's production team got some pretty serious criticism for the recent Dahmer series, because they reenacted some very difficult scenes, including the murders, but then also some courtroom scenes where family members were given an opportunity as part of the judicial process to express themselves and their loss. And they tapped into some real anger and emotion, which I completely understand. I've never had anybody to focus on in the Colonial Parkway Murders. I hope to have that opportunity at some point. But you can understand how someone would feel the way they feel, having lost their loved one. Some of those people made the point that seeing that reenacted, as you mentioned a moment ago, by actors, it's like reliving it all over again. No one contacted them and told them that was going to be part of the series. And Ryan Murphy made some incredibly lame comment about, we tried to reach the families. I'm sorry. I've actually found, if we put in a little bit of time, we've been able to pretty much find anybody. Unless someone has moved off the grid like Ted Kaczynski, for the most part, you can find them if you want to. I'm not buying that Ryan Murphy, with his staff and the money behind those productions, and they made a lot of money with Dahmer.
Yeah, they did.
Big hit. They actually said it's the biggest hit he's ever had. You can't tell me that they couldn't find those people to let them know what they were working on and to at least get their input. Know that these stories to some extent are public because they're based on trials and public documents. So it's not like you need their permission. It's not like the New York Times needs my permission to write an article about the Colonial Parkway murders. They have, and hopefully they will again. I'm not always 100% happy with how things are portrayed or whatever, but I think some consideration for victims' families is really important, and I think that's part of what the Engage with Empathy campaign is all about.
No, I agree. And I remember when they were filming Lover's Lane Murders here, and you and I were both on set. And I remember the day that they brought on the actress playing Kathy in the reenactment. Yeah, and I was concerned that day about whether or not you were going to be okay. And of course you were going to be okay. You're Bill Thomas. You're virtually freaking indestructible. But it was really a question for me of, okay, are you going to be able to handle watching this woman who looks like your sister? Are you going to be able to watch her essentially reenact Kathy's murder? And I wasn't thrilled that they were choosing to do reenactments for that. I really wasn't. I remember I couldn't stay for that part of the shoot because I had grading and papers and various other things I needed to do. So I wasn't able to stick around. But I remember leaving and being very concerned, like, is this something that's going to shake you up badly, or are you going to be able to take it in stride? And being you took it in stride. I know you did.
It was difficult, though. Part of the role of consulting producer, Kristen, is you're listening very carefully. Now, remember, you're going to shoot a ton of video that's never going to end up in the series because that's just the nature of television. Part of the role of the consulting producer is to help make sure that they don't make any mistakes, any errors of fact. So a lot of times I'd be off camera, wearing headphones, listening very carefully to the conversation. And it's not 100% scripted. So there's a little bit of improv going on there. So it's not like every word is on a teleprompter, but they're trying to tell the story. If it's an expert like a Jim Clemente describing how a well-prepared, aggressive offender might approach a couple, or it's them reenacting, not my favorite either. But I remember at several points that night when they were concentrating on telling the story of Kathy and Becky's murder, and they'd brought in a small white car that looked like Kathy's car.
Yep.
We're next to the river, and it's designed to look like that parking area. They asked me several times, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I appreciated them asking. And it was difficult. And it was very weird when I met the actress and all of the young actors that were playing the parts. There was a young woman playing Kathy, Becky. They actually set it up with one offender and two offenders because, there were different theories about whether there were one offender or two offenders there. So you had to have 4 actors, 2 women, 2 men. And I remember thinking how much this woman looked like Kathy. And of course, she was dressed like Kathy was that night and had her hair styled in the same way. And it was really weird. And it was sometimes difficult. And there were a couple of times when I thought, I'm not going to watch this. I'm not going to listen to this. A lot of that didn't end up in the show, but I was there when they were getting the shots they needed in the way that they felt would help tell the story. And it's really difficult.
For all that, as a genre, we are trying to make sure that the victims' stories are told appropriately, that the families have a voice, that justice is done. There is still so much work left to be done on everybody's part. And it's not just the role of journalists or podcasters or production companies or whatever. It takes all of us to be aware and empathetic of the people who have lived with this, whether it's a surviving victim or family members or investigators who have worked this case they have a very intense emotional attachment. It's really important as content creators that we be mindful of all of these people and try to, as Kelsey and Sarah and Julie have said, engage with empathy. And that means being mindful of these things. It means not giving into salacious speculation that may be hurtful to friends or family surviving victims or might hurt the legal process. And it means maybe just being a little more mindful about what you're buying if you happen to go on Etsy and see a sweatshirt that may seem funny in the moment, but honestly, would you want to go up to Kathy Kleiner wearing that sweatshirt? She survived Ted Bundy. I would hate to see her face if anyone ever walked over to her wearing a sweatshirt that glorified Ted Bundy. Bill, any final thoughts from you about engage with empathy? I know that this is something that is very close to both of us, but clearly you have a lot of feelings on the subject as well. How would you like to close out?
I think the idea of engage with empathy is beautifully phrased. I think it's something that all of us should be aspiring to. And when I say all of us, those of us that are producing content and those of us that are enjoying content, listening and learning and hopefully growing an understanding of what some of these victims have been through.
And I think that also means not being afraid to call out people who are behaving badly and tell them this is not the appropriate way to engage with empathy.
I think that works for me.
Well, that is going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristen Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.